Good day, everyone. Today we're going to start with staking out highways. By now, I hope you've done the reading on section 23.8, page 701 of the textbook. There are a few key components we need to know about staking out a highway. First of all, we must understand the term alignment. Remember, an alignment is a sequential step-by-step segment of the roadway or whatever structure. Usually it depends on whether or not we're using a particular piece of it. In this situation, we'll be considering the center line of the constructed road or to be constructed road. A tangent is a piece of the alignment at which we would do prior to the beginning of a curve. There's an equal tangent curve means that the distance from where the roadway would bend, there's a distance from that bend point back to the roadway and from that bend point forward onto the next roadway to define where the curve will be laid out. This will become up at a later station. The next one is a full station. Full stations are defined as what is the even full increment that would be on alignment. In this situation, it might be something like 1 plus 0, 0, 2 plus 0, 0, 3 plus 0, 0. What that simply means is that this is a slice at the center line of the road, which we will be looking at. That is either 100 feet or 200 feet or 300 feet from the beginning of the project. Then the last two things we'll be talking about is what's called a slope stake and a grade stake. So please follow through with the slides with me, and I will explain to you as we go on. Let me move into the slides for today. Okay, the next slide is what's called a roadway section. There are three types of roadway sections I've listed here. A typical roadway section. This is one where, and in the typical roadway section, there is something called a fill section, a cut section, and a transition or a mix section. A fill section simply means that the proposed grade of that particular area sets above the existing ground, therefore meaning that we would have to fill material in to get to that desired elevation. The next one is a cut section, and obviously that means that the finished design grade sets below the existing or proposed elevation. And the last one is called a transition or a mixed section. That simply means that there will be a little bit of cut and a little bit of fill, or a certain amount of cut or fill, depending on the engineer's decision. On slide 19, you can see some examples of these sections. Off to the left, you can see an example of a mixed or transition section where if you'll look on the left-hand side, you'll see that 2-to-1 slope and the road bed. That means that there's been some fill material that puts in that actually defines that heavily defined line there, shows where the roadway would actually be. To the right, you see that the original ground is the area shown right below it right here. This area here is the existing ground, and this section right here was taken or cut out of that existing ground to kind of slope back the road so it looks that way. This is an example of a transition section. Off here on the lower one, you'll see is a similar example where the original ground was already here, and in this situation, the builder is intended to excavate or remove this area in here. The concept of a transition or mixed section means that the designer would like to then use that material, preferably that material is of good source and quantity that it would be able to be replaced and put down on this section right here, where we would provide a fill for the material. Oftentimes, the design engineer will try to get a balance of this, eliminating the situation to have to either haul material to the site or remove material away because it is in excess. Off to the left and the right hand side, you will see what is called a cut and a fill section. The first one here being a cut section, you can see here is the existing ground or the existing elevation. The area below it is the finished or proposed finished grade, and this area in between it will be cut away or a cut section. The next section is what's called a fill section. The fill section will then be, if you notice, the original ground being down here, and in this situation, the proposed construction in this situation roadway would be setting above that existing groundway. So this is what's called a fill section. So today's concept is to talk a little bit about slope staking. Slope staking is a concept in which we will set the stake at a point that is at the point where the existing ground and the finished ground intersect. I know the slides say something about a short distance away 2 to 4 feet, but that's really not the practice. The practice is to set it right at the point where the two would intersect. So in this sketch above, you will notice that right here, there's a stake set. And let me explain to you a little bit about this sketch. This line that you see that runs across here is the existing ground, while the line that you see here that's very rigid and straight would be the proposed area to be cut. In this situation, it's a cutaway section. It's a cut section because the existing ground sets higher than the finished ground. The information we're about to show explains how to set a slope stake, but let me explain to you a little bit about how we would do this in the field. In this situation, or the example that you're about to see in these slides, uses an auto level to determine the elevation, but we are simply trying to get the elevation of the existing ground at particular places along the roadway section. Remember, the section is a part that's either left or right of the center line alignment. That is usually determined by the stationing and the way the stationing increases. One would always look toward the way the alignment would be increasing and then look left or right of the particular center line at that point. So in this situation, you can see here's an example of there's a instrument set up, has an elevation of 609. There was a reading of 4.8, or there was an elevation of the existing ground at 604. The height of the instrument at this time was 609.3. So right there at the center line of the construction, you can see that the center line stake is at 604, and you can see that the design finished grade is at 600 even. So therefore, we're in a situation where there would at least be there would be exactly 4 foot of cut at that particular area. Now, if you look to the left, you can see that we have a stake that they push out. Now, the information that would be necessary to set a slope stake would be the distance that is desired at the particular center line or hinge point at which the elevation would be change direction. And we would also need to know the distance along this bottom of this roadway to decide what that is. We would like to know the whole distance, which is usually given to you in the construction documents. And then from there, what we would do is decide whether or not we're going to be at a halfway point of that. In this situation, would be half of the roadway. Then we would also need to know the slope ratio of this line. The slope ratio of this line is usually given in the construction documents. With that information, we could then calculate the point at which the the existing ground and the finished grade intersect. The unfortunate or the hard part about this process is that it's sort of a trial and error, hit miss process, because the ground is constantly changing. So therefore, that particular point has to have a few trial and error type indications to find that. Let me head on to the next slide and I'll explain further. Okay, slope staking in general. Slope staking is normally used in the process of construction. It's used in streets and highways, drainage canals, oftentimes when we have a uniform pattern of the design structure, whether it's going to be a roadway or whether it's going to be an area where water would be carried in something like a irrigation channel or things of that nature. They're also used in bridge approachments and things such as embankments for dikes or dams or reservoirs and berms. Remember, this is to give the contractor a guide so that they could build to the finished grade, whether it's above or below the existing ground surface. Okay, here is the procedure for slope staking.